purpose is to help business owners achieve their goals, take home more of what they earn, and ultimately a big part of that is on exit when they sell their business. But unfortunately, it's not something that everyone thinks of or thinks about how they can actually impact that until potentially it's too late to actually make any real changes to it. So today's session is going to be looking at that, having a look at how you can value businesses, different methodologies behind it. It's going to be quite general, but we can kind of, if anyone wants to discuss anything in more detail, we can set up further calls with people further down. And it's going to look at some of the key drivers behind that as well. So, I said, what is my business worth? We've got a phrase that we kind of use quite a lot, which is most businesses aim at nothing and hit it with tremendous accuracy. But I'm actually going to kind of tweak it a bit and say most business owners aim at nothing and hit it with tremendous accuracy. Because actually it's owners that are driving the business, and quite often, they might set up the business to have more flexibility, so they can be their own boss. But they might have this figure in the back of their head that I'll sell the business for this amount, but they've not, set anything specific. They've not set an exit date, and they've not kind of put steps in place. So one of the questions we sort of ask people, and one of the things that comes up in our Wally session is, have you set a date to exit the business? And it's quite a powerful question and can kind of help really focus on what you need to do in order to do that as well. And that kind of ties in with what is your end goal. Some people might not have thought about selling the business. Some people that might be all they're focused on. Might be definitely got a figure in mind. And that's when we ask them what their business is worth, what we typically get are 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, but there's no basis for those figures. It's just a figure that kind of almost plucked out there. It's a nice round number. Well, that'd be a good value from a business, but there's no backup to that. And again, what do you need out of your business? Sometimes it's driven by, I think I need 1 million. So actually having a think about what do you need to retire on. So let's say you set a retirement age of 60, you set your exit date, and you think, I'm going to live for at least another 20 years from there. Probably need about 50 grand a year, £1 million. There's a nice round number. That's what I need. But if you're a husband and wife business, you're taking out 100 grand per annum and you're netting 160 grand, then a £1 million sales, the equivalent of 6 years of income. So can you set the business up so you can get that recurring income? Is that a better outcome rather than selling the business? Or what's the tipping point? There's also other things to consider. To get 1 million cash in hand, you might have to sell for 1.125 because you get the first £1 million at 10%. And then after that's 20%. So to get 5 million, you actually have to get £6 million sale to get 5 million cash in hand. Have you got a balance on your mortgage to pay off? What are your monthly currently outgoings? Is 50 grand a year sufficient? Do you want to live in a button bed up in the islands, or do you want to travel around the world on a cruise in retirement? Do you have any costs through the business that aren't part of your monthly outgoings at the moment? So company car, mobile phone, all these things might have to get considered in inflation, care homes, and then also inheritance tax and BPR. If you've got a business that's worth 6 million, if something has to happen to you and you pass the shares on to your family, then those shares are potentially exempt under the business property relief rules from IHT. If you've got 6 million sitting in cash, 40% of that's going to get wiped out in inheritance tax. Although, again, Labour are potentially looking at removing business property relief on IHT, so that's something we'll keep an eye on. But what is the impact of that? Maybe your goal is not to exit in a lump sum, maybe it's to build value that you can pass on and create generational wealth. And so inheritance tax then becomes part of your planning as well. So again, going back to what's your business worth? What do you take out the business annually? How do those things compare? And what do you want to achieve going forward? And one of the questions we kind of ask people as well is, what would happen if you took 6 months off? Would the business be okay? Would it falter? Would it be under cash flow difficulty? What would be the impact? I think, in the majority of cases, the answer we get is that the business would struggle. because it's reliant on that owner. So effectively, it's a kind of lifestyle business. You've got a job rather than a business that's got any real value to sell. So what we then start to talk about with clients is getting the business sale ready. What that means is if you will have to sell it, you're getting the maximum value for it. The business isn't relying on you. It means you can take holidays without having to be in your emails all the time. It means the business has got sufficient cash flow there. It means the business, you know what the business are, you run some numbers, you can do a check in it, get a spot check, a health check regularly to know if the business is performing or not. You don't have to be in it working 50, 60-hour weeks. And you're not the key driver behind the business. Also means, as I said earlier, when we looked at the income piece compared to 6 years of a £1 million sale, maybe you don't need to sell. It could run with your minimal involvement, and it's almost an investment, and you're getting income there, and you're putting a senior management team that runs the business without you. And some people go, well, why, Dan, you think about this now? Why would I want to sell? I don't want to sell my business. I'm getting good income out of the business at the moment. But there's obviously unforeseens that happen. There might be a family emergency, it might be illness for yourself or someone you love. And so if you then have to sell the business under duress or, without putting these steps in place, there's no guarantee that you get the maximum value. So you put all this effort, all this sweat equity into building this business, and actually you're not going to get the return that you want. The other thing you get is, if you do get to the stage you want to exit the business, normally it's because you're fed up, you've had enough, and you want to just be done with it. If the business is relying on you, you're going to have to stay on for at least 12 months, possibly 24, maybe even 36 months, and become an employee of the person that buys your business. And for most owners, that is something that they can't really cope with or are not willing to entertain. And so, again, that can impact the value of your business if you're not willing to stay on for that period afterwards to help with the transition and the handover. So, kind of run through an example of that where we've got two businesses, both got turnover of £2 million, both got a gross profit margin of 30, and they both net about 10% net profit, so about 200,000. That's where the sort of similarities end. Vandelay's got a strong senior management team. America's got more of a dictatorship where the owner is involved in everything. Vandelay's got a regular pipeline of work. America, all the sales contacts are the owners, and they are the main person that drives all the sales and new business coming in. Vandelay has got a systemized business with documented processes, whereas America is relying on the owner. It's all in their head. They know best, and they know all the systems, and they aren't able to tell anyone what processes are in place. As a result of that, Vandelay, the owner's involvement is limited, and they pay themselves by dividends. America still pays themselves by dividends, but they're working 50-hour a week to even top everything, don't go on holiday, and have no free time. The potential valuations for these businesses is 1 million for Vandelay and only 475 for America. So although you've got two businesses that are turning over roughly the same amount and making the same amount of net profit, the actual value is more than double on exit because they've got these systems and processes in place. So I'm going to just go through the valuation quickly and kind of use this as an example. So there's many factors that can influence the valuation and lots of different methodologies that we'll come on to. And if you give 100 accountants the same figures, you'll probably get 100 different valuations. But in most basic terms, normally it's a multiple of the earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation, so EBITDA. So in this instance, Vandelay's, both at 200,000. If I was buying America, I have then got to pay someone to do the owner's job. I've got to pay them a salary. The market rate salary then has to be deducted. So for me to get my net profit out. So in return on my investment. So I might have to pay someone £75,000, maybe more than that. But I've used that figure as an example at the moment to get 125 grand EBITDA. Whereas in Vandelay, it's a well-run business. I don't have to hire anyone. The owner can exit because I've got a strong senior management team in place. So I'm going to get £200,000 recurring income year on year if I make this investment, possibly more, because I'll be able to make some savings or increase the business. The multiple, because it's worked so well systemized, might be a multiple of 5 compared to a multiple of 3 in America because it's so reliant on the owner. So therefore, you've got that compounding impact where I've got a higher multiple and a higher EBITDA results in a £1 million valuation compared to 475,000. As I said, there's lots of different valuation methods. Discounted cash flow, where it's kind of looking out over the cash flow over the next 10 years, and you're accounting for inflation and the kind of yield you'd want from that. You can look at dividend yield, by which invest in the business, what kind of returns would I get? That kind of drives the value. You've got other ones where, it might just be the asset value or the breakup basis. There's no real value in the business itself, but there's a value in the assets that the business holds. In some industries, there's a multiple of turnover, which I'll look on the next slide. But the most common one that we see is a multiple of the EBITDA, and then plus sometimes any surplus assets that are in the business as well. So this is just an example to show the kind of different valuations you can get between different industries. So if you've got lawyers, accountants, and IFAs, they're all professional services, but a lawyer turning over £2 million will typically get a 0.6, so 1.2 million, or to 0.8 times turnover valuation. So anywhere between 1.2 and 1.6. Accountants are slightly better, 0.8 to 1.2. So if you've got £2 million turnover business, a kind of green one, you might get a valuation of 2.4, more likely to possibly 1.6. An IFA, however, has a valuation of 4 to 4.5 times their turnover typically. So they might only have turnover of 500,000 in order to achieve that £2 million valuation on exit. And the reason for that is lawyers whilst they've got client, but quite often it's quite transactional by nature. There's no guarantee you'll get the same amount of income. You might have one big piece of work, but then nothing for a couple of years. Accountants, you've got that recurring income year on year, so it's fairly standardized, so that generates a higher multiple. And IFAs, again, once that money is under an asset investment, those clients are quite sticky, they don't tend to move, and so that generates even higher multiple because you're getting that recurring income. So if you're an investor going in to buy that business, you're going to get a much better return on your investment. So although those ones are multiple turnover, quite often it does tie into multiple of EBITDA, and it normally ends up in that sort of 3 to 5 range, especially at this kind of lower end of the SME market. There's lots of other resources we use when we're doing company valuations. Look at a private company price index. We'll look for other similar listed companies. However, if you've got a listed company that's turning over millions, if not billions, then their price earnings ratio might be much higher than what it would be for an SME, and we have to discount that. And again, sometimes you can see those discounts up to 75% of what a similar listed company would be. And there's other databases that we have access to that we look at as well. But I'm just going to have a quick look at the private company price index, sorry. And I'll highlight a couple of things on this one. So you can kind of see we're up at 17.5 times multiples back in 2021, now dropped to 11.9. That's looking at the FTSE. Private company is actually 10.2 to 9.7, so it's not had quite as much of a fluctuation. And you can see the kind of breakdown of the deals. This is, again, what's publicly available. So sometimes not all the deals will be picked up on this. So again, 9.7 for historic, sometimes up to 11.9. But if you look at the PPI ones, the average enterprise value is 42.8 million. So again, potentially a lot higher value than some of the deals at the lower end of the SME market. So again, there might have to be a discount on that 11.9 or 9.7, which is where you typically end up at the 3 to 5. Although we were speaking to one investor the other day, and they said that in Scotland, they would never pay more than 2 to 3 times multiple. Obviously, that was just their interpretation and what their risk appetite was. And again, that kind of ties into something that will come into later on, is ultimately a business is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So you might get figures like 9.7 multiples, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will get someone that's willing to pay that. What other factors can impact valuation? So with regard to the multiple itself, obviously, the more systemized the business is, if it's got processes in place, if they've got regular KPIs, then regular feedback on their accounts, monthly management accounts, that'll have a higher valuation than a business that isn't systemized. Increased turnover, as I said in that previous slide, those deals that are up at 40 million have got higher multiple than the ones that may be down at £1-2 million deals. And so as you move up those brackets, potentially higher multiples as well. And recurring income or long-term contracts. If you've got a long-term contract in place, someone that's coming in to buy that business knows that they're going to get that income coming year in year, and so they're going to have that multiple. And again, that's why you see sometimes for the recurring income, such crazy multiples on things like Netflix or those tech companies, where they've got that subscription model, but they're going to have that recurring income, and the clients are sticky. Once they're in, they tend to stay in, and not leave. Again, there might be letters of intent, so something for upcoming work, a letter that they're willing to buy for you, and they're if you get this investment, so that can help with sales as well. Having a strong management team in place. Again, we talked about the business being reliant on the owner. You've got a strong management team in place. It helps remove them from the day-to-day. So if you're an investor coming in or someone's going to buy the business, it means you can carry on trade without any minimal disruptions. Whereas if it's wholly reliant on one person, if that person leaves, what happens to the business? There might also be value in intellectual property, trademarks, brand. All those things can sometimes impact the multiple. And having an engaged team, so not just a strong senior management team, but actually an engaged team overall as well, and making sure that that client retention. So Gallup Q12 is an employee survey that we've been looking at internally, and it's quite a good way to track that. And so again, it could be part of, you can include in the due diligence, showing that you've got an engaged team. And then bits below that kind of tie in, like what are the values of the business, what's its purpose, what's its culture. All those things can impact the engagement of the team, but also help to drive a higher value, which I'll show about a slide later on that kind of covers that. Looking at EBITDA itself, is there a way that we can increase this? So can you increase your pricing to improve your profitability? Is there any way you can get it so it's not reliant on the owner? So again, in that first slide with the Cremerica and Vandelay, because it was so reliant on the owner, we had to put a salary adjustment through to replace it. Whereas if we can get the business so it's systemized, then we don't have to have that advic. That's going to increase the EBITDA. And on pricing, quite often what you see after an acquisition is there's a hike in prices, and that's very little impact on the customer numbers. So they're getting the benefit of that. So again, sometimes actually making those price changes yourself means you get the benefit year on year, also on your overall valuation. And it's quite often a question we'll sit down with clients when we do the 4 ways to grow your business is, can you increase your prices? And start looking at that. And we're going to run an event on the 4 ways to grow your business in the future as well. So we'll keep you updated with that if you're interested in that session. But just as an example, if you had an average sale of £1,000, if you put a 10% increase in, that's going up to 1,100. Again, how many customers would you lose? If you're making a 30% margin, you could actually afford to lose 25% of your customers and still make the same amount of money. So again, if you've got a business that is highly reliant on you and you're doing everything, if you lost 25% of your customers, but you're still making the same amount of money, then what does that free you up to do? Does it free you up to do more stuff to grow the business? Or if you don't lose any customers, you've got more profit to invest in the management team, to allow yourself to remove yourself from the business. Plus, you've got the impact of increased profit for your multiple. And again, assuming that's gross profit. So in this example here, if you're on £2 million up to 200,000, that's going straight on the bottom line. So if we went back to the Cremerica Industries one, where you had £200,000 net profit, you're now going up to £400,000 net profit. So a 10% increase in your price in that example has actually increased your profits by 100%. Other factors to consider. So Rosalind used this example the other day. She said, think of it as selling your home. You know, there's no point in the outside looking amazing and it's all ready, and then when they start their due diligence, the inside looks like this. And then you have to call in Bag Income for a callback if anyone remembers them. Get your house sorted and ready for sale. So due diligence is a big part. We've had a couple we've been working on recently, and I think Rosalind had a document that was 111 pages due diligence questions. And they had another one that was sort of two separate. There's accounts due diligence and tax due diligence. And then you've got the share purchase agreement was 150 pages in one of those instances as well. It included things like warranties and guarantees if you sell it, then putting things in place. So again, if you're putting some stuff through the business that isn't a genuine business expense, if you're trying to, you know, evade the tax man, then it might be okay in the short term, but when it comes to due diligence, that could really impact your valuation. I think in one case, Rosny actually had, they were asking if any personal expenses at all went through the business, and they were wanting to do the director's loans and all those transactions as well. So even if they were going through the director's loan and being accounted for correctly, the fact that they were getting paid for on the company card was a bit of a flag for them when they were doing the due diligence, just to make sure everything had been allocated correctly. And that's where said management accounts, they're asking for your latest set of figures, and all you've got is a set of year-end accounts that are over a year out of date. Then how do they know that your business is what you say it is? If you're projecting your figures forward, if you've got up-to-date management accounts, if you've got a handle on your numbers, then that can help to increase that valuation as well. Other items, timing. It's not, you know, I'm going to sell the business and it just happens overnight. It could take 12 months or more. And then quite often, you might get to the late stages, or a few businesses get to the late stages of selling, and then the deal's just not being the right for them, because either they could take more out personally, and they were, you know, maybe at an age where they didn't want to retire, or when it actually came to the crunch of it, it wasn't the right deal for them, and they decided to move on, and they've done some changes to grow the business, to maximise that value, because they've set a target, and now they're re-entering negotiations again. So it may take more than 12 months. Might also be clearance required from HMRC potentially, depending on who your buyer is. Again, I've got down the bottom, it could be like, who are your buyers? Is it a management buyout? Is there share swaps? It might be clearance required for that. And do you have any seasonality in your business? Or do we talk about those long-term contracts? If they're about to come to an end, you wouldn't want to necessarily sell then. You'd want to get those renewed, because that's going to increase the value of the business. And again, what's the age of your customer base? It might not matter, depends what business you're in, but again, if you look at the example of the IFAs or the accountants, if all your customers, if you're looking to retire and you're 65, 70 years old, then, and all your clients are the same age, they may be looking to retire as well. So who's going to want to come to buy that business if they're all going to exit themselves in the next few years? There's less recurring income there. NDAs or non-disclosure agreements, again, depending who it's probably good practice for anyone, but especially if it's a competitor or that you're looking to sell to, you want to put a non-disclosure agreement in place even there very early on, just to make sure that anything that comes out in discussions can't be used for their competitive advantage. Legal fees, typically these are paid by the buyer for both sides, but there's normally still two sides of legal fees. And again, we had a relatively simple one where it's a management buyout, and I think both parties incurred legal fees of over 20 grand each. So again, it's just another cost to be aware of. And how's the purchase going to be funded? Because that might impact the time of your payments. Again, you might want to, if you want your payment over in the next or immediately on the day of exit, you might get a lower value than being paid out over a longer period, because you're taking on more risk. But there might be earnouts. You know, if we hit X level of turnover, you'll get an extra payment, or if it drops, it might actually impact your payout. Something else might be an equity or cash deal. So again, depends what your risk profile is and what you want. But you might want to they might offer you equity in their business, which is obviously potentially might have business abilities to grow if they exit, but might prefer the cash on the table and cash in hand. And then, excuse me, culture we kind of talked about earlier. We were down at speaking with an accountancy owner last summer, who had bought his partner out in 2020, and the turnover of their business at that point was 3 million. He's now grown the business to 19 million, mainly through acquisitions. And he said the main things he looks at, he said there's 5 things he looked at, and it was culture, 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 and financials. I've only put 3 cultures up there, but again, it's something that's often undervalued or kind of taken for granted, and people focus on the financials. But actually, if you're looking to sell into a similar business, that if there's a culture clash there, then are the team going to leave? Are the clients going to leave? They might be acquiring the business because actually they want to. It's hard to get team members in that market, and so if you're acquiring it, but then the team culture clashes, it's not going to be the right fit for them. And so this is an excerpt from this book, Traction, where they're talking about getting the core values alignment right. Actually ended up being unusually high multiples for the acquiring company as a result of that. And then, who are the potential buyers? Again, it's worth thinking about that, because there's no point in doing all this work, getting to the end, and then finding out there's not actually a market there for someone to buy your business. It could be a supplier who's, maybe wanting to make more margin and vertically integrate. Similarly, it could be a customer that's wanting to do the same and could bring those processes in-house because they're making more margin rather than pay you. They're able to bring that in-house and make more money. Might be a competitor who's wanting to consolidate and acquire, take more market share. Or it might be someone in the team, either management buyout or employee ownership trusts. Is something that we've seen a lot more of recently, and it's been a bit more attractive. They've all got their positives and negatives. I think the important thing is looking at it. I remember speaking to a colleague I used to work with in practice who had moved into industry and actually acquired one of the firms that he used to audit, because it had no value in it. And actually, if they were to shut the doors, they had something like a £400,000 liability for redundancy. So, but they hadn't thought about who they were going to sell to, and they didn't have any sellers, and it just got to the point where they just wanted to walk away. And so he came on and basically said, I'll take off your hands for, I think it was not quite £1, but it was pretty low value. But then it saved them the redundancy, all these kind of things. But they hadn't put that plan in place, and it worked all the years. Yeah, they got good income out in the intervening time, but they hadn't got that value and exit that they'd hoped for. And I said, as at the start, a business is only worth what someone's willing to buy it for, and ultimately what you're willing to sell it for. And sometimes you need to split the difference. You might have a figure in your head of 2 million. They might think 1. It might end up more like 1.5 or 1.4. So whenever you're thinking about the valuation, making sure you put some realistic expectations in there. And again, there's no harm in starting to see what other options are out there, and who might buy it, and starting to think about how you can drive that. Because if you think about go back to the previous slide, sorry, quickly. The supplier, customer, competitor, your team, they might all have slightly different drivers. So again, which drivers are you going to focus on to grow the business, to grow the EBITDA, to get that multiple up that's going to maximize the value? And it might be you don't know which one, but there might be some key ones that apply across all of the potential buyers that you can focus on. So kind of key takeaways that we can have from this is, getting sale ready doesn't mean that you have to actually sell, but it's a good mindset to get into, and actually setting a date to think about. Consider what you want and need. If you've got depending on your lifestyle, depending on what you want to do in retirement, might have a totally different impact on what you're going to sell the business for. Who might want to buy the business? Again, that can sometimes impact some of your decision making and give you clarity over what you're trying to grow going forward. And that will help you to consider the key drivers that impact your valuation as well and how you can improve these. And remember that compound effect on the Vanderlei Industries one. If you can increase the EBITDA because you're less involved, you don't have to add back the salary, the business runs without you. Not only do you get the increase in the EBITDA, you can also generally get a higher increase in your multiple as well. And so the two of those multiplied together create a much bigger difference. And finally, set a date. It really does make a big difference. It really focuses the mind and can help make decisions for further down the line. So